Rachel Rooney trained and worked for many years as a teacher of children with special needs while she brought up her own 3 sons. She then rediscovered her childhood love for poetry and returned to the reading and writing of it with a passion. In 2011, her collection of poems, The Language of Cat, was longlisted for the Carnegie Medal. It went on to win the 2012 Clipper CLPE Award. Her collection, My Life as a Goldfish, was shortlisted for the Clipper Award in 2015 and has now been chosen as a Year 2 title for the Just Imagine Reading Gladiators programme 2018-19. Nikki Gamble met with Rachel to talk about My Life as a Goldfish and her other projects.
Being a poet, if we can start there, it's not necessarily the job that everybody thinks that they're going to do when they leave school. And I presume that that's not how you started out when you left school. So I wonder whether you could share with us how you came to be a published children's poet.
I used to write a lot of poetry when I was a child. I was one of 6 children and we didn't have much money. We had very few toys or treats or anything. We had lots of books though, because my father was an English teacher. And what I used to like to do is get away from all my siblings and grab a book and try and get as far away from them and go and hide and enter my own little world. And because I read a lot, I used to write a lot. And I wrote poetry, but I never showed it to anyone, not even my parents. It was solely for me, absolutely, categorically. It was my little thing. And I stopped when I was 13, and I didn't begin writing again until I was 40. I had no thoughts about poetry at all between the ages of 13 and 40. I trained to be a special needs teacher and had 3 children and got on with other things. And then I don't know what happened, but around 40 I wanted to, there's a few things I wanted to say, or I wanted to have some control over some aspects of my life that was purely mine, and poetry sort of just came back into the picture. And when it returned and I remembered how much I liked it, it all came flooding back, and I basically got poetryitis. I just couldn't stop.
It's interesting because very often it's those teenage years where people do turn to poetry and they write all their angst and get that out on the page. But I suppose in connection with that, you said it came at a point in your life when you knew you wanted to get something out there. So maybe there is a connection between that and the teenager that writes poetry in their bedroom. Before we look at your books in particular, I wonder what it is about poetry that is such a good media for saying those things that we want to say.
For me, poetry, well, apart from the fact that it's quite short, and I've got quite a limited attention span, I couldn't see myself writing a whole novel. I would probably lose confidence halfway through the novel and think, oh no, this is no good. With a poem, if you've spent a couple of hours on a poem and it isn't very good, then you've only wasted 2 hours, not 2 years of your life. What is it about poetry? I think poetry is like condensed. It's condensed thoughts. So it's quite an intense medium, and it's about truth and lies. Poetry, you can sort of tell truths through lies or through make-believe, and I like the idea of little portable nuggets that you can carry around that can comfort you or interest you. I remember walking the dogs once and thinking, before I started writing poetry, I want to write little nuggets of truth, little thoughts and sayings that I could carry with me. And I didn't realise what I was describing to myself was I want to write poetry, but I didn't realise it.
I find that absolutely fascinating, that poetry has a memorability to it, a portability, you describe it, that kind of memorability which other forms of language don't have. Maybe the odd advertising jingle works in the same way, and often that's written in poetry actually. And then we often kind of reach for that poem at those vital moments, don't we? Even people who think that they don't really like poetry will sometimes reach for a poem at an important moment in their life.
Yes, what I'd like to say is that although I really love poetry, I don't like all poetry. You don't have to like every poem. I would say probably at least half of the poems that I read I don't like. Out of 100 poems, 50 I might not like, 25 I might quite like, 20 I will really quite like, and 5 I will go mad for. So you have to sort of read around and see what you like. Some will leave me cold, some will make me incredibly excited. So there's not just one thing that's poetry. It's varied.
Your first book was The Language of Cats, but the one that we're going to look at mainly today is My Life as a Goldfish, which the Year 2s are reading. Tell us a little bit about how that collection came to be.
Well, I'd written The Language of Cat, and I was aware that some of the poems in The Language of Cat are a little bit hard, and then I started going to schools and people would buy The Language of Cat, when the younger children would buy The Language of Cat, and I was a little bit worried that I was selling them something that they might not be able to access for at least 2 or 3 years. So I thought I really do need a second collection that younger children can enjoy and access quite quickly. So I decided to go for My Life as a Goldfish. Yeah.
We're going to explore some of the poems in the book in a little bit more depth, and we thought we'd start with Wide Open. I wonder whether you would read that for us first, Rachel.
Of course. Wide Open I put at the very beginning of the book because it's a poem about a magic eye, and I tell the children when I visit school that we all have got a magic eye, and our magic eye works when our normal 2 eyes are closed, and I always ask them, what is the magic eye? And some of them, they come up with some ideas, but eventually somebody always says, oh, it's the imagination, and that's what it is. So this is all about the imagination and how you can go to places that you can't normally go and do things that you can't normally do with your normal eyes. Wide Open. My magic eye sees the sticky beak of a baby chick before the eggshell has broken. It can catch the sun as it squints and the stars as they wink at me. My magic eye has discovered an unnamed planet spinning at the edge of the galaxy. It watches a woolly mammoth give her last sigh, then sink gently beneath the ice. My magic eye stares hard at the soft hairs vibrating on an ant's belly. If you have scribbled your secrets in a diary, my magic eye will have read them. Yesterday it spied on your nightmares, and tomorrow it will spy on your dreams. My magic eye is wide, wide open.
Gosh, that's lovely. Thank you. I was really interested. You didn't go straight into reading it. You gave a little bit of an introduction there, and I think that's useful for teachers to think, how do you orientate children towards the poem that you're going to read? You don't have to set straight off, do you?
No. I mean, sometimes what I do is I read it first and then I talk and we sort of slightly deconstruct it, or it depends on what the situation is. Sometimes I'll signpost it for them, depending. I think with adult poetry, there's always usually a few words that you say that sort of just tunes you into what to listen to, because listening to poetry, obviously, you don't have time to study it, you have to take it in straight away. So it's quite nice to read a poem twice, actually, just straight off twice, because it's hard to catch everything in one go.
Absolutely. I know that you don't, because you've told me that you don't use notebooks to keep your ideas. So this is a reasonable length poem. Does that all come to you in one go? If you don't keep a notebook, how do you structure a poem like that?
It varies. Sometimes they come almost fully formed, as if by magic, and usually that's always quite surprising, and it's always really enjoyable when that happens. Sometimes it's like pulling a tooth and it takes a long time, but I usually just have lots of loose leaf paper on a clipboard, and I tend to just scribble words down randomly across the paper at all angles, and then I fine-tune it, but I keep all that wad of paper together and I just put a new piece of paper on top. And I always work on one poem until I feel it's totally finished. I mean, there's always possibly 1 or 2 edits I do later, but I just like to really nail down one poem before I start on the next, and I live in that poem for quite a few days. And when I'm walking the dogs, in my head I'm saying the poem, even though I'm not even conscious that I'm saying it. I am actually repeating it as I'm walking. I think about it at night, I wake up in the morning thinking about it, and until I've finished it, got it right, I sort of usually know when it's completed.
Some poems seem to offer themselves up as models that children can work with for their own writing. Would you say that this is one of those?
Oh, this is most definitely one that I use, and you can use it from any age, from probably, year 2, certainly to year 6, you can use this poem, because you give a certain amount of structure. So I talk about each line, and the first one is about looking through something. So I say, what magic power is that? And so that's X-ray vision. Or the second one is about personification, and the third stanza, the third 2 lines, is about seeing something that's really in the distance. So we call that telescopic vision. So I talk through each line, and we deconstruct what the magic power is, and I have a list of those. And then I talk about how I don't always use the word sees. So we think about other words like stares or glares or watches or discovers or examines, and so we write a list of other words that we could use instead of sees. And I usually have a little eye stickers, so we put our little eyes on, and I let them put their little sticker eyes on. And I tend to work and write a group poem first. So for those less able children, that they've seen it modelled, and it's also a way of extending the sentences or fine-tuning the sentences. And then I set them off on their own task. So by that point, they're sort of pretty ready. So it's a very simple structure to follow. And I also discourage, I think, at that point, anything rhyming, really. I think it's just more important to have good word choice and good ideas and good imagination. I think rhyme can get in the way when you're young.
Yes, people think it's an easy skill, but to do it well, I think is really hard. I often think, actually, that acrostic poems, the same, are quite hard for children to write a poem using an acrostic.
Yeah, I mean, I've never done an acrostic poem. I think they're fine to do, but it's not something that's particularly ever appealed to me, personally.
Before we move on to hear another poem, are there others in this collection that you think work in a similar way, that are good as models for writing?
Yes, there's one called 7 Pebbles, which is a very, very simple poem. It's just I got the idea when I was on the beach in Brighton, which is where I live, and I was looking at all the pebbles and looking at all the different shapes of them and how each pebble is different, and I talked to children about that and how we're all different and everything's unique and it's got its own properties. And I do a version of that with them, which is with shells, and that's all about it's sort of similes, one or metaphors, although you don't even have to use that word. You can just say, what does it remind you of? Look at the patterns, look at the detail, turn it around in your hand. I get them to actually physically hold them and touch them and smell them, and they always put them to their ear and hear the sea. And so we look at little things about what they might do, like a shell might be a mermaid's fan, or it might be a Mr. Whippy ice cream cone, and so we write poems based on that. That one works well. For year 2s, if I'm thinking about rhythm and rhyme, it's good to tune their ears to rhythm and rhyme. I might not necessarily want them to do a rhyming poem, but if I did, I'd probably use the poem Flame, because it's got a very regular beat. So, Flame. Fire under footfall, fire over skies, fire on a matchstick, fire in my eyes, fire holding hunger, fire seeking wood, fire hiding danger, fire feeling good, fire as the enemy, fire acting friend, fire I must stamp on, fire I must tend, fire in the embers, fire at the heart, fire to remember, fires yet to start. So what I get the children is I get them to read it out and sort of tap out the rhythm, which is sort of 2 beats to a line, fire under footfall, fire over skies. So we sort of stamp it out and we get them moving. And then we do our own version. And it's a good model to use because if you can just talk about a very rainy day or a very sunny day, you can say rain on the rooftops, rain on the trees, rain on the garden, rain on my knees, so it really doesn't matter what you put in, so it makes it easy to do a rhyming poem with a rhythm, and I think year 2s can deal with that, actually.
You said something before you went into the reading of this poem about metaphor and simile, and then you said, but you don't need to mention that term. Do you have a view on when and how children should be taught the terminology that goes with alongside poetry?
Well, to be quite honest, I think children will probably be able to tell me a few terms, these days. I take absolutely no notice of those things, personally, but I know children, it's sort of drilled into children. I might throw it in as an aside, personally, but luckily that's not my job. When I write poems with children, they're always wanting to know what's the learning objective at the top of the poem, I'll leave that to teachers, I'm afraid. I'm sure children know much more about fronted adverbials than I do.
So, I think we were going to have a look as well at a poem called Nobody Knows.
I'm reading this one partly because it's quite a lyrical, rhyming poem, but also because I've seen teachers use this one in schools. And they've read the poem, they've obviously talked about the poem, and children have drawn little sort of maps of the journey within the poem. And it's interesting because all the children draw different types of maps. Some draw circular ones, some are more linear, so each child can bring their ideas to what this journey involves. And it's called Nobody Knows. Nobody knows what John Joe knows, nobody knows but he. So John Joe took me for a walk and showed his world to me. I met him by the garden gate when the sun broke fresh and new. John Joe knows that fairies sleep on cobwebs laced with dew. We strolled along the river's edge, it glistened in the light. Sailing on a leafy boat, we saw a water sprite. I followed him to forests and sank down to my knees. John Joe knows that wood elves meet in the hollow of old trees. We climbed an icy mountain, clouds drifted past our eyes. There we spotted unicorns play chase across the skies. I joined him at the ocean where the mist rolled slowly in. John Joe knows the silver splash is the glimpse of a mermaid's fin. He brought me to a stone cave as the sun began to fall, to watch a dragon's shadow dance across the entrance wall. We wandered in the starshine, an orange moon glowed bright. John Joe knows the man up there will keep us in his sight. I got back home at midnight. He walked me to my door, but as I turned to say goodbye, my John Joe was no more. Nobody knows what John Joe knows. Nobody knows it's true. So let me take you for a walk, and I'll show his world to you.
Gosh, thank you, Rachel. Just listening to that poem, it strikes me how classic it feels. It might be to do with the form, but as I listen to it, I could be listening to something out of the ilk of Walter de la Mare, for example.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know if I consciously did it, but I think possibly I wanted it to be quite lyrical and sort of draw you in that sort of old-fashioned way. I'm often not conscious that I'm doing that, but I know that I want to get across a certain mood, and I can feel the mood, really. And I did want it to be a bit timeless, really. I wanted that poem to last forever, in a way. Yeah.
It's quite a tightly structured poem, that. Can you tell us a bit about the structure, how that's put together?
Well, it's in rhyming couplets. I think there's 8 beats to a line. Nobody knows what John Joe knows, nobody knows but he. 7 beats to a line, yeah. Very regular, and it's sort of circular, so you go back to the beginning. So it's almost like passing something on. It's like passing something on through a generation. So you come right back to the beginning. And I wanted to put in sort of mythical creatures along the way, everywhere. So I've done that.
I think one of the things that strikes me when you have a single poet collection like this, and it is so wonderful to see more and more single poet collections. I love collections, I love anthologies, but in a single poet collection you hear more of the voice of that one poet in its full range and variety. So you don't get limited to being one thing. This is what you are as a poet, and this collection really shows how varied your voice is as a poet. There's one poem in here, My Life as a Goldfish, and I find that really hard to read. Why is that?
Yes, it is quite hard to read. And and you might look at it and not understand it at all. I won't read it out because it's really one that you need to see on the page, and I wanted to put in at least one poem where the arrangement of the poem is as important as the words. So in a way, it's not quite a shape poem, but it uses the page. So when I often do this on stage, and I actually get the children or a child to perform it. So I get 3 children out holding up a little pretend TV and a little bunch of flowers and some books, and I explain about how when I was young I had this goldfish called Flug, and he lived in one of those circular bowls in the middle of the front room, and his life was very, very boring because all he did was go round and round and round, and just to make life a little bit more interesting he might go around the other way of the bowl, so he might go anti-clockwise and then clockwise just to liven up his rather boring life. And then life got very exciting because my cat came along. And so what you have on the page is you have the words all spread out because the goldfish is going slowly. So I talk about how gaps on the page mean that you would say the poem more slowly, and when things are in capitals you might say it loud, like cat, and it's very loud. And then all the words are squashed up tight together, and I ask the children why, and they say, they get the idea, and they say, that's because they're darting really fast between 2 or 3 objects. And so I actually get them to enact it out and to bring the page to life, because I think that's the only way you can really do that poem. Mm-hmm. Some children might get that without the help, but quite often, possibly at the Year 2 level, they will need the extra visual stimuli.
I think it's an important point to get across that some work on the page, some work with the voice, and you made the point early on that a poem is many different things. It's not one thing. And as we read the poems in this collection, there's a whole variety of ways in which we can read and respond to them. Yeah. I can see on the table in front of me something that I found really delicious, which is your new collection, illustrated by Chris Riddell, a kid in my class. And I think we really must tell people a little bit about that.
I'm really excited about this new book, actually. It's basically a book about a class, because when I go into classes, and as all teachers will know, classes are their own little sort of ecosystems, and one child comes into the class, it can totally change the dynamics of the class. One leaves, it can change the personalities of all the children and the teachers and the assistants, create a sort of living world, really. So I wanted to sort of reenact that in the book. I did want to write because my first 2 collections aren't cohesive. They're just lots of poems put together, and I like the idea of having a poetry book on a theme, but I didn't want to just do a poetry book all about fairies or all about something. I wanted there to be a reason that there's a theme, and the reason for the theme is that it's a class and it's an ecosystem. I've actually now think of these poems as people, and I've become really fond of them. I mean, I really do imagine them as people now. And I wanted quite a wide variety of different types of people with additional needs, a lot of diverse characters in there, but also to show a spread of form. I didn't want them all to be samey. So I wanted them each to be themselves within the poem, if you know what I mean.
Maybe to illustrate that, we could just talk about 2 or 3 of the characters in there, maybe some of your favourites.
Who should I start with? I'll start with Accident Prone. There's always, and this is slightly based on my younger son, who is like a bull in a china shop. He's an adult now, but he just comes into the house and something breaks. And it's not really his fault. Some people have good reasons that they're accident prone, but if you ever tell a child off, they just say, it was an accident, I did it accidentally. So I was trying to sort of play on that, really. Accident prone. Poked a pencil in his eye, swallowed a blue bottle fly, split his trousers in PE. Accidentally. Dropped his lunchbox in the mud, left the taps on, caused the flood, snapped his glasses into 3. Accidentally. Tore the brand new wall display, let our hamster out to play, broke the teacher's DVD accidentally. Styled his hair with paint and glue, locked himself inside the loo, tripped his laces, scraped his knee accidentally. Trapped his fingers in the door, twice the size they were before, taken off to A&E very carefully.
I can see myself reading that one with everybody joining in with the accidentally.
They get it wrong on the last one. Yeah. What else shall I do? I'll do Tomboy because this is slightly based on me. So there's several characters in this book that I was a mixture of, and one of them was a tomboy. I was very much definitely a tomboy. Tomboy. Not glitter and glitz, not hair clips and bangles, painting of toenails and doodled love hearts. More baseball cap worn at a jaunty right angle, skateboard and shin pads, arm wrestling, darts. Not twirling pink tutus and crushes on singers, pouts in the mirror for selfies, fake fur. More spit on the sidelines, whistle through fingers. Not a Tom, not a boy, just being more her.
Fabulous. And from one tomboy to another, I'm really pleased to see that in there. Tell us about the hamster.
The hamster the hamster gets let out by the boy who's accident prone, as we hear, and he does appear throughout the book. Now, the hamster is one of the cleverest characters in the classroom, although you probably don't realise because you never speak to them. But if the hamster could speak, he's a great observer of life, and he's seen everything that's been going on in the classroom and learnt an awful lot on the way. And shall I read about them?
That would be lovely.
Okay. I've done it in the sort of style of the modern Master General, if you know, that sort of thing. The hamster speaks. I've missed out on the school trip, as I am an ace historian. I've studied Greeks and Romans, Tudors and the odd Victorian. My knowledge of geography is really quite superior, from deserts of Death Valley to the ice lakes of Siberia. I'm good at maths. I can convert a fraction to a decimal. My long division is superb, my geometry professional. I've studied water cycles, butterflies and reproduction, all the properties of solids, liquids, gas and heat conduction. I punctuate my sentences, they're complex and grammatical, and spelling words like xylophone is seldom problematical. My ears can pick out pitch and tempo, rhythm and percussion, and I know Kandinsky painted abstract art and that he's Russian. I've learnt about religion from Baha'i to Christianity, and now I'm learning French. I wonder how I've kept my sanity. Perhaps that's why I chew on bars instead of vegetation, and I exercise my muscles with repeated wheel rotation. I'll take a nap while others write up in their learning journal. Maybe, like me, they should consider being more nocturnal.
Fantastic, Rachel. And we have just one more from this collection.
That was quite a hard one. So let's go for there's always some children in the class who need a little bit more help than others to behave, and sometimes we forget that. This is about a boy who does need a lot of rewards to behave. Teachers might recognise one or two children like this. Sticker. If he sits still on his cushion and can line up without pushing, or he doesn't make a mess when doing art, if he says he's sorry or he doesn't interrupt the story, then he gets a shiny sticker on his chart. If he passes out the pens and says thank you to his friends, or recites his 1 times table off by heart, if he wears his coat at play and he doesn't swear all day, then he gets a second sticker on his chart. If he eats up all his lunch or remembers not to punch, then our teacher says he's choosing to be smart. And although I don't agree, he can watch a DVD. Now he's got 3 shiny stickers on his chart.
I think as well, one of the things that I really appreciated in this collection was your introduction, because we do recognise when there's a whole array of characters, but of course we're all more complex than that, and I think that introduction is very important, isn't it?
Yes, for me, there's no way I would have wanted these poems out without mentioning to the children, because I was worried that children might use them because they are caricatures, and they might sort of say, oh, you're that one or you're that one. And what I was really more interested is that they look to themselves and they say, oh, I can see myself in that one, and I can see myself in that one, and that we aren't actually really as simple as all that. We're much more complicated. So I very much wanted that to go along with the book. I didn't want it to be used against anybody. I wanted it to be a way to inquire further. I mean, children aren't stupid. They know who's who, and they know what's what. And I had very firm opinions about my classmates. I had the ones that I liked, and the ones I didn't like, and the ones that annoyed me, and the ones that intrigued me. And I'm sure it would probably be the same today for those people. So you have to accept that children, they have opinions, and belief systems, but they have to learn to be kind and also consider who they are as well. That's equally important.
Rachel, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today and getting some real insight into your poetry world and your poetry life. We're looking forward to reading these books for Reading Gladiators. We may even send you some of their work so you can have a look when they're finished. I'd love to see any responses to the book. I really do enjoy it. We will definitely let you know how they get on. So Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.